Is anti-Zionism the new face, the latest rebranding of anti-Semitism? Well, this triggering, controversial question requires a deeply thoughtful response. And that's why we're breaking this down with Shimon Myers, the CEO of Arise. So, my friend, is it fundamentally anti-Jewish to be fundamentally against the Jewish state?
Okay, so this is a loaded question, right? And I think rather than having me just answer that question with my opinion, I would rather provide some background and information and allow your viewers to answer this question for themselves. Some of the reason for that is I am of Jewish descent. I am Israeli. And I find that, in many cases in today's world, being those two things sort of disqualifies me from answering that question from a global perspective, although, of course, I can give you the answer from my perspective. So hopefully that's helpful. And I feel like prior to October 7th of 2023, when everything changed for Israel in a moment, in a day, and quite frankly, I think it would be safe to say that everything changed for the world on that day as well. I think prior to that day, most of the people that are deeply engaged with anti-Zionism had never even heard the word. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but certainly it wasn't something that was in the news, wasn't something that you were hearing a lot about, the big anti-Zionist movement. And I think just looking at that from the perspective of Israelis is really, really important. I want you to imagine for a moment that this small land, the size of New Jersey, with approximately, let's just say, an approximate 10 million Jews living there. I should say 10 million Israelis because it's not only Jews. We know that between 20 and 25% of Israelis are non-Jewish. But on that day, the worst atrocities that are humanly imaginable took place and were perpetrated against this people. So on October 7th, and we're not going to go into what those were exactly, but the perpetrators of those atrocities, some of which are unthinkable and certainly should be unspeakable, took place in Israel at the hands of Hamas. And not just Hamas, but also civilians, but we don't need to get into all that. Imagine as a people in a small country going through something like that and then having 250, there were 1,200 people killed, 250 taken hostage, which would be the equivalent, just to put it in perspective, of, an enemy coming across the borders for your American listeners and watchers. It would be like a hostile enemy coming over across your border somewhere here in the United States, perpetrating the most heinous, violent, atrocious attacks against your people, and then taking an estimated per capita, it would be the equivalent of 9,500 civilians back across to their country. Although in this case, again, it's nuanced and questionable, but taking them back across the border and hiding them, keeping them as hostages. Some of them, we know there's still around 50 still to this day that have not been returned. But I want you to imagine, after all of that, waking up the next morning on October 8th and watching people marching on the city streets of the most civilized countries of the world and marching across some of the most esteemed halls of education in the Western world with signs saying "from the river to the sea," and also globalize the Intifada. I want you to just think about what that would feel like as somebody living in Israel. Bear in mind that this is weeks before there was ever an Israeli response to what happened on October 7th. Weeks before that had ever happened, this is what you're seeing on the news. And I think for your viewers, if you were to ask an Israeli the question that you just asked, is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, as an Israeli, how do you think they would answer that question in lieu of those things?
I think that's everything you just said is very insightful. And I think having been to Israel 30 times, there's so many caricatures and slogans and half-baked truths, and it required you can't tweet yourself out of this. This is a deeply controversial, deeply interwoven conflict. But I think fundamentally, what a lot of people, I don't know how else to say this, would say, okay, well, Zionism is just the last remaining vestige of colonialism. So would you say, and since it's colonialism, the people that are being colonized have all the rights in the world to fight against that. And if you fight against that, you're not anti-Semitic. You're just fighting colonialism. How would you respond to that idea?
Here's how I would respond to that. That's certainly one perspective. Another perspective would be that Zionism and the return of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland is the greatest story of decolonization to ever take place in human history. So that's another perspective on that. I believe that the perspective that this is some the last opportunity to fight white colonialism can be debunked and disproven on every level imaginable. This is not an imperial force that came in, sent out by some country to conquer this land. It couldn't be further from the truth. And that particular argument misses so many of the key points, including all of the Sephardic Jews that were forcefully pushed out of the surrounding regions during that time and into the land of Israel. I think that there are so many different things that factor into this, so many questions that we should be asking that we're not asking in answering this question. One of those might be, how many wars are being fought around the world right now? Right now, as we speak, there are an estimated 100 military engagement wars being fought somewhere on the globe. Most of the people that are marching on the city streets don't even know that any of those wars are taking place. What about the wars that we do know are taking place? What's the biggest one that we know right now is taking place between Russia and Ukraine, right? Is there any big movement to say that one of these countries doesn't have the right to exist, whether you agree with their governments and their government's decisions, whether you think Putin is a dictator or not? I don't see any movement to, say that Russia has no right to exist because of this war, whether you think it's moral, immoral, or otherwise. There's no movement to do that. So why is this movement why is this even a thing? I think is a better question. Why, when Israel is attacked by an enemy and has to defend itself, fighting a defensive war, why is the existence of this country called into question over and over and over again? Why, after thousands of years of being persecuted in every single country around the world, why, after all of those years and then all of that culminating in the greatest atrocity that known to mankind in the Holocaust, and then from those ashes rise this desire for self-determination in our ancestral homeland? Why, time and time again, do we have to defend our right to exist as a people and as a country?
You're making all these valid points, but I can already hear the comment section where it's like, okay, he made a valid point, but let's deflect. Let's go to another avenue. And it's kind of frustrating when you want to have a thoughtful conversation where it's like, I just want to be proved right. So let me move on to the next thing. And the next thing will be this. Okay, fine. Like whatever, like you're making some points, Shimon, but you know what? I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just anti-Zionist because look what they're doing to the Palestinians, because of the occupation, because of all these horrible things that the IDF, I mean, I don't have to tell you this, the IDF is being basically painted around the world as nothing more than Nazis. I mean, they're just doing this horrific stuff to the Palestinian people, occupation, so on and so forth. I don't have to explain that to you. And obviously, we can continue this conversation, and we will continue this conversation. And if you like this conversation, let us know in the comments, because I really do feel like you, Shimon, have an educated and thoughtful response to all these really profound conversations that people just simply aren't having. They're just sending out tweets. Again, they're saying these taglines without actually thinking about all the perspectives and all the context. Yeah, let me finish with this question, and I'll let you kind of answer it how you want to. Okay, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm anti-Zionist because look how terribly Israel is treating the Palestinians. What say you?
So what is the end result for you? What is the end result of your anti-Zionism? What are you hoping to achieve by being anti-Zionism? What are you saying? What does anti-Zionism mean to you? Would be the way that I would answer that. We can role play if you want. It's a moot point because anti-Zionism truly is the resistance of the right of Israel to exist. You can criticize Bibi Netanyahu. You can criticize the IDF. You can criticize all of these different things without calling into question the right of this country to exist. And I'll just tell you right now, as an Israeli, I have some questions. Now, we can talk about occupation and what that means. I'd be happy to get into that today if you want to, Raj. But when it comes to the right of this nation and this people to exist and have self-determination in their ancestral homeland, what I don't understand is why is this continuously a question? The world came together in 1948 and determined collectively that this people had a right to exist in this specific place on the map. And we know that that was attacked immediately, and we could get into all of that. There are answers to all of these questions. But the fact of the matter is, Israel does exist. And I think it's pretty largely understood and held that Israel has nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. So unless we all want to go through nuclear war, Israel is going to continue to exist. And by perpetuating that line of thought, that from the river to the sea, what that really means is that Israel will no longer exist. Well, guess what? That option is not on the table outside of nuclear war. Let's stop with all of that. That's not providing a solution. I do think it is really, really important for listeners to understand that there are many well-meaning people, and I think our side needs to understand that as well. I think Israelis and Jews, and I think most of them do understand this, but I think it's really important that we understand that there are some really well-intentioned people that have been completely misinformed and completely brainwashed into this movement. And some of them have perhaps the best of intentions. None of us want to see violence. None of us want to see children dying. But I think it's really important to understand the reasons that those things are happening and view them through the context of so many different things. History, warfare, the fact that Israel is fighting an unprecedented war. This is something that no country in history has faced to date. An enemy that has a civilian casualty strategy in place. Think about this. With over 500 kilometers of tunnels built under civilian infrastructure, that's a tunnel system that's longer than the underground in Great Britain. And they've entrenched themselves in these tunnels underneath civilian infrastructure it started with 250 of our hostages. We know that it's down to 50 now. And they're boldly proclaiming their intent. They boldly state that October 7th was just a warm-up for what they're intending to do. And, one thing we know, they mean what they say. They've shown that. They've demonstrated. This isn't just sword rattling. They've demonstrated time and time again that this is exactly what they intend on doing. And so no country has had to face something like this before in the history of mankind. You know who's not allowed in those tunnels? Civilians. No civilians are allowed in those tunnels. In Israel, every single home has to have a bomb shelter by law because they're under constant threat. Okay? So just think about this in contrast. Think about these things and think about the predicament that Israel is in. It would be the equivalent, again, of the United States having 9,500 of its citizens taken hostage with a hostile enemy on its border, proclaiming that they intend to continue the most vile attacks against your people, and then entrenching themselves amongst civilian infrastructure and saying, come get me. And also simultaneously, you've got the people of Gaza. I'm not saying that every single one of them, but largely, and this is well documented, people saying that they desire to be martyrs. They desire for their children to be martyrs, to be shaheeds. And it's something that a lot of people don't talk about. But if you want to really understand this conflict, you've got to understand all of these different things and the difficult spot that Israel finds itself in.
Well, I'll tell you what. I know that there's going to be mountains of comments on this video, and this is maybe just part one of our deeper conversation about the buzzwords, the triggering, controversial ideas behind the whole Middle East conflict. So if you're watching this and you're going to just post some troll comment, go ahead. But otherwise, please do ask a question in the comment section or point something out that Shimon said that you really agree with, disagree with. I think the goal of these segments is to honestly have a dialogue, a conversation, to understand. Like again, I've been over there dozens of times. It's the context, it's the layering, it's the deep understanding of all of the different perspectives that allow us to have a full comprehensive idea of what's really going on. And you cannot receive that from a chant, from a tweet, from an Instagram post. You have to have a comprehensive, many conversations. And this is just, again, the first of many, hopefully, with my friend Shimon. So again, ask your questions in the comments, post any thoughts you have about our conversation, and we will continue this conversation later. But as for now, Shimon, thank you so much, my friend, and God bless.
Thank you. Can I end with a quote?
Of course.
So there was a very wise man. I've been reading this lately and just sort of thinking about this. A philosopher, Aldous Huxley, but he said the surest way to work up a crusade in favor of some good cause is to promise people they will have a chance at maltreating someone, to be able to destroy with good conscience, to be able to behave badly and call your bad behavior righteous indignation. This is the height of psychological luxury, the most delicious of moral treats. And I would just throw that out as a question to those that are in the Western world watching what's happening unfold. Is this playing out in real time in the Western world? Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, my brother. We'll talk soon.